Welcome to The Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where purpose meets performance and leaders are built to shift legacies. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, executive strategist, speaker, and the secret weapon behind leaders who drive transformation at the highest levels. Each episode delivers bold truths, power skills, and real-world strategies to help you lead with precision, show up with presence, and build the kind of influence that outlasts trends. This is the space where high-impact decisions are born, where influence is intentional, and where the bold don't just lead, they change the game. So if you're ready to rise, ready to lead, and ready to create the kind of impact that moves markets, missions, and minds, you're in the right place. Welcome, Game Changers. So thrilled that you are here with another dynamic episode where we are talking about leadership. We have Rod Collins here with us today, and he's going to be sharing with us something that is revolutionary as it relates to leadership. You know, I promised and committed to bring you fresh insights and rich perspectives, and that's what Rod is going to do for us today. He also has a book. He's going to talk a little bit about his book. I'm so excited about this book, and I believe that you are going to be as well. With that being said, let's introduce Rod. Rod, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
I am thrilled that you are here. Tell us the name of your book.
The name of the book is Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody: Why Self-Managed Teams Make Better Decisions and Deliver Extraordinary Results.
I am thrilled to talk to you about that. Now, let's just jump into it. How did you come up with that title for that book?
Well, I came up with that because there's two organizational structures, and most people are only familiar with one. And the other one is rarely used, but is more powerful. The one, of course, everybody is familiar with is the top-down hierarchy, where you have supervisors and people report to bosses. And those bosses are able to give people orders and follow work accordingly. Most people don't know there's a second organizational model, and it's actually used by a small number of companies. And I write about three of them in the book. But this alternative management model is the decentralized peer-to-peer networks. So if some of our listeners are having trouble trying to understand that, I would ask this question: what if I told you that there is a company that has been operating like this since 1958? Today it has 10,000 people in 30 countries around the world. And today, as has been true for over 60 years, there are no bosses. No one has the authority to assign work to anybody else. And they are a highly successful business who've made a profit in every year of their existence. I think our audience would be stunned to hear that. But this alternative management model, I think, is going to become more important as the world gets faster and faster and faster, because top-down hierarchies were really designed for a slower time. And I'm sure as we go through the conversation, we'll get into more details about these two models. But the Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody, it reflects the fact that networks leverage the collective intelligence of everyone, rather than just the intelligence of an elite few. And that's what makes them smarter.
That's what makes them smarter. Thank you for sharing that. Now, how did you get into this work?
Well, I kind of stumbled into it. I discovered network management by necessity and by accident. In the middle of my career, I had spent about 15 years as the general auditor for a business alliance, a large business alliance that when I left, it was about $19 billion operation. It was a business alliance of 39 separate companies and 60 different operating sites. And we were doing okay, but we were just kind of treading water. And after 15 years as an auditor, and I found out that's the cushiest job because you get to make recommendations for everybody else. And so one day they walked in and said, well, we're going to put you in a position to implement the recommendations, turn the operations around. We want to be growing and not just treading water. And so as I thought about that challenge, I thought, why is it that we cannot get these 39 organizations to ever agree to anything? Our meetings were perpetual debates. In some instances, we were having the same debates year in and year out. Some problems were never getting resolved. And the light bulb went off when I thought, we operate like this as a hierarchy. And we spend a lot of time with these organizations telling us, you're not the boss of me. Well, and then in the past, we had defended the fact, well, we have that role. We get to set the strategy and the execution. And I thought, well, what if we operate as a network rather than a hierarchy? Because that's what we are. And I realized there was nothing out there about how to lead networks. And so we came up with some processes and procedures on our own, because if you can't translate a model into processes and procedures, then it just remains as theory. And one of the processes we came up with was something that I now call the Collective Intelligence Workshop. But when we first set it up, I really had in mind a no debate meeting. Because why is it that we could never resolve anything, in some instances over the course of 2 decades? And it's because different people coming from the different organizations had different belief systems and structures around how to operate. And they were just arguing back and forth, but nobody was changing their perspective. And so I thought, what if we designed a no debate meeting, or at least a meeting that would minimize debate? And so we did do that. And in the course of doing that, we realized we needed to also meet differently. Because in the typical organization, the top level meets with the top level, the mid-level with the mid-level, and sometimes the people close to the processes get invited to meetings, but a lot of times they don't.
Correct.
And they have a lot of key information. And so I thought, what we're going to do is get a microcosm of our business in a room for 2 days in the presence of about 50 people. And we're going to have people representing all levels and all disciplines. So we'll have top-level executives, and we'll have people we've hired out of college 2 weeks ago in the same meeting with the same voice. And in order to get people to listen to each other, and one of the guidelines we had for these meetings was Stephen Covey's principle: seek first to understand, then to be understood. And in debates, we don't spend a lot of time trying to understand others. We spend all our time trying to get people to understand us. So how are we going to change that? And one of the mechanics for having a no debate meeting is when we had initial presentations, people could only ask clarifying questions. They couldn't agree. They couldn't disagree. They couldn't come up with another idea. There would be other places in which that could be done. And it was a little uncomfortable at first because people just aren't used to asking questions only about understanding what you think, regardless if I agree or disagree with it. We split them into small groups. We mixed people up so they were sitting with people they didn't know, so they wouldn't be established, predisposed cultures and hierarchies. And you would have these different levels interacting with each other. And in those small group tables, we would ask them for their thoughts on solving a problem. And we usually would ask them to come up with the top 3 or 4 things that would be most important to solve the issue. And another Covey influence, first things first. What are the first things we need to do? And as the tables reported out, we went into the clarifying question discipline. We would take all of their flip charts, put them on a room. We had a process for taking maybe 30, 40 items down to 15 by combining duplicate ideas. And then we would have dot voting, and it was amazing. I did this over the course of 10 years there. And I'd say 95% of the time, we had a break point after the 4th item in the voting process. So what I mean by that is you might have had this top item got 30, the next one got 28, then 27, 25, and then 14. And so you see this big break. And we would ask the group, if we do these top 4 items, will it work? Well, to our surprise, we had unanimous agreement in the first meeting with these 50 people. And we couldn't resolve dates for 20 years. And how is it that all of a sudden in 2 days, and that what it was, and I realized this looking backwards, we had tapped into the richest resource in every organization, and most of them do not have access to it. and that was the collective intelligence of our own people. So fast forward 10 years, I leave, the first year after I had left the organization, I wanted to understand, why did this management model work? And so I'm giving an example of one thing we used. There were other processes too, but I want to point out this one so our audience can get a feel for this. I wanted to know why this worked. And I stumbled across a book as part of the research for the book I was writing by James Sharalyn, The Wisdom of Crowds. And I think this book is still as relevant today as it was when he wrote it, probably now 18, 20 years ago. But in there, he talked about, what do you have to have in order to tap into collective intelligence? And it's 4 factors. And without any one of the 4, you can't tap into collective intelligence. The first was diversity of opinion. The second was independent thinking. People must be free to express their opinions without fear of retaliation. You needed local knowledge as part of the process, people who are actually close to processes or close to the problem. And you need an aggregation mechanism. And when I saw that, I realized why these no debate meetings, which I now call collective intelligence workshops, work. We had all 4 aspects. We had diversity of opinion because we had people from all over the place. We had independent thinking because the facilitation process assured everybody could speak. There would be no censorship in the meeting. We had local knowledge because we had people close to the customers and processes along with the top executives. And the dialogue between them was very, very critical. And that dot voting was the aggregation mechanism. And so just getting a group of people together is not enough. You've got to have these 4 attributes, and they have to be real. And so that's how I stumbled into collective intelligence, and it is an incredibly powerful resource.
Thank you for that. Let me jump in. I want to back up and ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
Have you ever seen it not work? And if so, can you give some ideas or some insights as to why it hasn't worked?
When you have all 4 attributes, I've never seen it not work.
Okay.
All right. And there's a reason for that. What networks do that hierarchies don't is they correct for and uncover the things that top-down hierarchies miss. What gets corrected? When the elite few have the authority to make decisions, they come, whether they realize it or not, with unconscious biases. And there's no way to correct for it, because with command authority, they can tell people, shut up, get on board. The decision's been made. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And if they're blind to their unconscious biases and there's no way to correct for that, then you could be accelerating failure. Why are 2/3 of people engaged in hierarchical organizations? I suspect that this is one of the factors that's driving that, is people know it isn't going to work. They're not be able to bring that forward, and until the thing blows up and the bias gets uncovered later on down the road. The second thing that networks are good at, and this is really important in fast changing times, is uncovering what we don't know that we don't know. And it gets what we were doing in our collective intelligence workshops. That's one of the things we recognized, is in the course of this dialogue between all these different perspectives, when you get this person talking with this person and start to work the solution, and all of a sudden a third person jumps up and says, you can't do that. And we go, why? Because it affects me. And I can recall times thinking, really? How does this affect you? And then they would tell us. And it'd be like, oh, and the whole room would light up like, oh, we didn't know that. We didn't know that we didn't know that. Here it is being uncovered. People see it. We haven't begun the work yet. And so we're designing it with this in mind. So the purpose, what networks do is they expand consciousness. Hierarchies expand control. Control limits information. Consciousness expands it. And I don't mean consciousness in the spirit. I mean consciousness in the business sense. Being aware. When you uncover what you don't know that you don't know, you're expanding your conscious ability. And so this is why this thing works. And again, if you have all 4 factors, Diversity of opinion. Now, today I think we're challenged. I've been around the planet a few times, or I've been around the spinning of the planet a few times, and I have never seen a period of time in all my life where censorship is high, and we're missing the most important aspect of diversity, and it's diversity of opinion. That is the most important diversity that managers need to focus in on. Bring in all the perspectives, especially the ones you disagree with. And the other thing is the other thing that we're missing is free speech. I don't care whether you agree or disagree. Listen to people. Every single human being, I don't care what their perspective is, has some kernel of truth to contribute. Right. I may think another person is off kilter, and I may even be right. But my experience in these workshops, I told you, we literally invited people that I didn't agree with because I knew you have to get their perspective on board. Right. And at the end of the meeting, I say, well, I still think they're off base on 95%. But boy, the 5% that they brought to the meeting was really important. And they were happy because it was important. It was in the solution. And so this is how you get different perspectives coming together. What we accomplish, what collective intelligence does by eliminating the biases and by discovering what we don't know that we don't know, it brings us to a higher level of intelligence than we would normally have. And that really is important. And it's going to become even more important as we develop AI.
I would agree. I want to jump in. Yeah, one of the things I've seen as you're speaking is when you're thinking about just getting in meetings and how we have groupthink, or we have the one person who it's going to support their particular agenda. So our meetings become very political, and you can't really move forward. Or by the time, I've worked at some organizations that by the time they move forward with a decision, it's obsolete. So you've wasted all of this time, trying to ensure that there is absolute consensus, or you're, wasted all of this time, not bringing the smartest people in the room who need to be in the room. And so you're, as I would say, making the decisions from the ivory tower without having any clue of what it takes to really work and make things work. And so you see that there is leakage there. Finances, resources, people leaving the organization because they're not being heard. And so there is a cost to doing it in the traditional way versus what you're speaking of. And so when I hear you talk about collective intelligence and the collective genius of the people, what I really hear is it's also engagement in leadership, and you're growing and your people are leaving more fulfilled. It's more meaningful work, that everyone is using that term, but not necessarily knowing how to create it. But it brings up something else that you talk about in this. I absolutely want to get to, because when I heard this, I was like, okay, we got to talk about this. And that's the companies that have no bosses. So who's in charge if there's nobody in charge?
Nobody's in charge. So this is important. You mentioned organizations are political.
Right.
And although we're in a more political world now, anybody who's worked in an organization knows that they're political. The word politics is a derivative of power.
Right.
And what network management does, it transforms the way power works. Mm-hmm. And so in a hierarchy, let me say this, the two most important questions that an organization is built around is who decides and how does power work. We've spent some time talking about who decides, all right? And we're going to probe this a little more deeply in terms of the question you just asked. In the top-down hierarchy, the elite few decide, all right? And they are invested with coercive power over. Now, when power over is the dynamics of how power works, then who's in charge is a relevant question, because who's in charge gets invested with coercive power. Now, in networks, the real transformation is in how power works. So who decides in a network? Well, everybody does. And you have to have processes and procedures and mechanisms. It's not a free-for-all. There are deliberate processes to find out what the group thinking is. And again, we talked about how it uncovers biases and it expands consciousness. But the big transformation is in power. It's not coercive, it's synergistic. It's not power over, it's power with. And power with is a highly more effective form of power than power over. Power over is limiting. Power with is expanding. And so what happens in these organizations is the team has to decide. Now, let me give you a real life example of something that I used. All right. We were putting in a systems conversion in the business that I was in. We do them about every 15 years. And if we could have done them every 30 years, we would have expanded it because they were painful. And when you put the new system in, there would be customer facing issues you usually have to handle for hopefully a few weeks, sometimes a few months. And we were putting one up one year. It would go up January 1. And on May 8th, we ran the first test of this thing. And it was a miserable failure. But the executives who were briefing me were extremely upset because they said, we know the whole system doesn't work. Remember, we're an alliance of 39 separate companies. We don't know where the problems are. We can't come up with a work plan. Being in charge means nothing. And I remember after a relatively sleepless night, I mean, what are we going to do? This thing is on the road to being a disaster. And I thought, we use these collective intelligence workshops to solve problems we're aware of. Maybe let's use that here. And so I called a meeting. I got 40 people together in our office, and I invited all perspectives. I mean, we had lawyers in a meeting about IT, just to give you an extreme sense of bringing people in. And I put 4 flip charts in front of the room. I put blue, green, yellow, red. And I said, we're going to take these 60 operating sites. We're going to put them on these 4 charts. And here's the rules. Well, first of all, blue would be, if we were Rip Van Winkle and went to sleep for 20 years, they'll be fine on January 1. Green, we have to do a course correction. They'll probably be okay, but every once in a while, check in and correct them. Yellow, you got to hold their hands. And red means no matter what we do, they're going to be miserable. And I said, here's the rules for putting them on here. No one goes on here unless all 40 of you agree. And we just have to talk it through. And that's rule number 1. I said, rule number 2 is if the whole group is moving in a direction and you're sitting here thinking this is wrong, you have an obligation to speak up. Independent thinking. We're inviting it. If you are the dissenter, we want to hear from you because you may see something the rest of us don't. And I said to them, rule 2 is more important than rule number 1. In 3 hours, we got all those organizations on that list. And I said to them, don't worry about the blue. We're going to check in with the green every once in a while. The yellow, that's where the work is. We're going to put together teams. We're going to go visit their sites, and we're going to dig down on where they're at. And I said, the red ones, we had 2 of them. I need to make a call to the CEOs of those operating sites because the reason they're there is their chief technology officers decided this is going to fail. I'm not devoting any resources. And so a quick call got that turned around, and those 2 went to the yellow list. The surprise was on January 1, when we threw the switch on that new system, unlike prior conversions, not a single customer-facing issue. Now, there's collective intelligence. That group made we made decisions in the absence of data. There was enough intelligence by having the full diversity of opinions, by assuring independent thinking. Dissension will be welcomed and talked about. We had local knowledge because we had IT people in there, but also we had unusual suspects who could help us to see. And then we had an aggregation mechanism in the form of all of you must agree before it can go on the list. And so these types of processes are how the organizations form decisions. Now, some people may be sitting there going, oh, that's going to take too much time. Well, that's why you need processes. When we had the collective intelligence workshop, it was going to be 2 days. And I can hear some people saying, 2 days? My
Right.
God, who has time for 2-day meetings?
Correct.
Those 2 days saved us months, because when you correct for biases, you uncover what you don't know that you don't know early in the process. Those 2 days were an investment that paid themselves back. I used to have a phrase. I said, we're going to slow down and move fast. And
Say that
that's what we
often.
did. Most organizations move fast to slow down.
Right.
I'd rather slow down and move fast. But we had a time constraint. Within 2 days, we have to get from here to there. And the process was a facilitative one that was honoring those 4 aspects of gathering collective intelligence. And I think a testament to the effectiveness, everything that we applied this to came in on time, under budget, high quality. Yeah. So it pays for itself. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Question for you. If an organization wanted to move to this model, maybe in just a little small way initially and not necessarily more broadly throughout the organization, what would be the very first step, one step that you would give them to do? Because it seems like your culture and your leadership team has to be ready for this.
Okay. Very first step, if you want to experiment this, and it's the very first thing I ever did, and I actually did this when I was in the audit area. We had about 15 people, and we came to the staff meeting, and I decided, instead of the usual agenda, go through this and so forth, and we did have a problem we needed to work on. I divided the 15 people into 3 small groups, and I counted them off so they wouldn't sit with their friends. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the ones go here, the 2 goes there. And I said, I need you in the small groups to think about how you would solve this problem instead of us talking in a large group. And I left the room. And I said, work on it for 30 minutes. And then I came back and I had the 3 of them present their ideas, and they were different perspectives, but they were better worked out than if you had 2 people or 3 people arguing in a meeting. And then as these things came out, it turned out that in this particular meeting, they wound up gravitating to a combination of ideas between the different groups. And at the end of it, I said, how would you feel if we did our staff meetings all like this? And they said, we'd love it. This would be great. So that's what you would do if you're a middle manager. Now, if you're a senior executive, okay, and this is going to really challenge their thinking, and I can hear the groans already. When I became the chief executive of this business, and I was for the last 5 years, and we did turn the business around, and even though there were some people who thought I was nuts, I remember thinking this, they promote people who are really terrible managers if they get good results. I bet they'll reward crazy behavior if you get good results. And it turned out to be true. But anyway, most organizations have strategic meetings maybe once a year, maybe once a quarter, maybe, every 6 months. The senior leadership team that I had went off site once every 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And what we did was deeply think about the strategy. No operational issues. The senior staff would get together for separate regular but in these meetings, we went off-site. We're going to think strategically. In a rapidly changing world, you've got to do that. It's the gift that senior leadership gives the rest of the organization. They know the operations. They know how it's shifting. They understand the customers. What they don't have is the big picture. I remember being part of. Let me go back. When I would work with leadership teams, when I went into consulting, I would pass out 2 Post-it notes to each group, and I'd say, and this is with senior leadership teams, I want you to write 3 numbers that add up to be 100. On the first one, how much time do you spend on strategy, how much on operations, and how much on people? And then I said on the second one, how much should you spend on strategy? Should you spend on operations? Should you spend on people? And the results were almost always the same. The first one, 10, 80, 10.
Right.
10% on strategy, 80 on operations, 10 on people. What should it be? 40, 20, 40. All right. Yes, I'm sorry. It should be first one strategy. Yes, 40, 40, 20, 40. I said, why do you have this gap? Okay. A 60-point gap between operations. And who's spending, I said, if you're spending 80% of your time, who the hell's doing strategy in your organization? And by your own admission, you should be spending at least 40% of your time on that. And I would say to the teams, chances are the 20% that you're spending in operations is actually slowing them down. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you work out the strategy, tell them where you want to be going, they know how to do that. You're the ones who have to set the destination. They know how to drive the bus. Okay. But without you're setting the destination, you can be driving the bus all over the place, running out of gas and not getting to where you need to go to. All right. So, and when we would have these meetings, okay, whoever would bring up the agenda item would be the leader for the meeting. So, I didn't want to be the leader all of the time. The only thing I led is the first 20 minutes to decide what do we need to talk about? What's an A item? We have to do it today. What's a B item? We could postpone that if we need to. And who's going to lead each of these discussions? And we will stay with them until we get to where we need to get to. And so in the context of a whole day, you can manage your time accordingly. And so we would have 2 and 3 hour discussions, deep discussions on items. But they were learning opportunities, not debates. And with this discipline that we had with clarifying questions, what I noticed is people began, I knew we had made a difference when somebody voluntarily said, I'd like to ask a clarifying question. Okay, and then I knew we had changed the meeting dynamics because now they were bringing that in. And so these are 2 examples of things that could be done inside an organization. Yeah.
Thank you. It's almost time for us to wrap. So I want to ask you one final question. I say that, but actually I have 2 final questions. So one, we had a very interesting conversation about why there are no airplane crashes anymore.
Right.
Can you share your response to that for me?
Yes. The industry that has adopted network management is the airline industry in the cockpit. And the reason they've been doing it for 40 years. And when I first began working as a traveling employee back in the 1970s, every time I got on an airplane, I thought, I hope I'm not on one of the 3 or 4 crashes that we're going to have this year, because that's what we averaged, roughly. And that all changed in the early 80s. And it changed because there was a crash in 1978, in December 1978, where a plane had run out of fuel while it was circling, trying to fix a right landing gear issue. And the NTSB team that worked on this was just stunned. How can a highly trained, seasoned crew of 3 pilots in the cockpit run out of fuel and crash a plane? Fortunately, most of the people survived that crash. 10 people did perish, one of whom was one of the 3 pilots in the cockpit. As they listened to the tape, they knew why. It was the top-down command and control management model that was responsible for the crash. Because the captain, who was not flying the plane, the co-pilot actually was flying the plane, but the captain was working on the right landing gear problem and was overly focused on it, unconscious bias, and he wouldn't listen to the other 2 pilots. And as the NTSB team is listening, these people are too deferential. They're wondering, why isn't somebody screaming, Captain, we're going to run out of fuel. We got to land this plane now. They wouldn't do that, because you don't do that. You could lose your job if you spoke in that type of tone. So their recommendation was change the management model, run every crew through a new way of working, where every voice counts. The captain can't shut people down. The captain really he's a leader, but a facilitator rather than a boss. And remember, diversity of opinion, get different points of view, even if it's 2 or 3. Independent thinking, you have to be free to do it. And so once they put that in, the number of air crashes I don't get on a plane now, I don't think about it. And we really saw the import of this change in the cockpit There was a crash, it was in the late 1980s, where something happened that nobody was ever prepared for. And that was, it was on the old DC-10, and there was a breakage of one of the mechanical parts, and it cut off all the hydraulics. All hydraulic systems. Believe there were three of them. The plane, it's like being in a car and somebody takes the steering wheel away. This was the import of it. And there were three in the cockpit there, and they knew there was a training captain sitting in the with the passengers, and they did something that would never have been done in the old command and control days. Have him come up here. Let's have four people working on this. And they went into this team mode, and they were able to. They had power over the thrust of the engines, and they realized if we manipulate the different thrusts, we can get this thing so we can. We're going to have to crash land it, but we can get it to a runway and do the best we can. And so in a plane where nobody should have survived, 2 out of every 3 passengers did. And when they interviewed the captain afterwards and said, this was something you never trained for, nobody ever thought would happen, how were you able to do it? And without missing a beat, he said, crew resource management, which was their name for peer-to-peer network management. He said, without that, we all would have perished. And they all became believers in it because they realized what they realized is nobody is smarter than everybody. And so now in the cockpit, you won't be fired for speaking up. You'll be fired for not speaking up.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's so powerful, and it's a reminder for us that we need to invite voices, rich insights, fresh perspectives, dissenting opinions into our conversations instead of playing it safe and only listening to the voices, as you said before, that we have a bias towards. And so seeing that, of course, over and over in organizations. And so while we may not be in a life or death situation, we are responsible for the lives and the livelihood of the people we actually work with. Rod, before I let you go,
yes,
one final thing. Where can our audience find you if they want to know more about you and the work that you do?
Okay, I have a website, and it's rodcollins.net. And there's links to my books on Amazon. I do a Substack, and I'm applying these ideas to AI, and I've been writing about that recently. And if anybody's interested in, I do speaking engagements, and there's a link to that as well.
Perfect. So we'll have that link in the show notes. Rod, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all of your insights you shared. Cannot wait to hear the feedback about collective intelligence, as well as more reviews on your great book.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. You don't lead like everyone else, so your resources shouldn't look like everyone else's. I created the Game Changer Leadership Collection for high-impact leaders like you. Visionaries, change agents, decision makers who lead with intention and influence. This free high impact resource pulls from my leadership arsenal and delivers immediate actionable insights you can use right now to elevate your influence, lead with conviction, and drive lasting transformation. It's not just a toolkit. It's your first step toward leading at the level you were born for. Let me show you what's inside. The Leadership Edge Sampler. It's a preview of my 10 daily power skills to sharpen your influence and impact. The Influence Language Mini Guide. Essential phrases to increase your authority and build trust in every room you walk into. The Leadership Blind Spot Snapshot. Because the greatest risk are the ones we don't see. The Power of One Visual Aid. A reminder that even one decision, one tone, or one conversation can shift a team or stall a movement. The Executive Briefing Checklist, a go-to tool for high-stakes communication that drives clarity and alignment. The 5-minute accountability brief, a no-fluff framework to build a culture of ownership fast. And we have the Game Changer Ascension Model Overview, my proprietary leadership growth map to help you scale your influence with intention. These are the very same tools I use with executives, culture shapers, and elite teams. Leaders who know what's at stake and aren't here to play small. Because when you're called to shift systems, influence nations, and build legacies, you can't afford to lead on autopilot. This is where your next level begins. Download the Game Changer Leadership Collection today. It's free, it's strategic, and it's built for leaders who are born to shift the game. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, and this is your Leadership Edge. Thank you for joining me on the Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where we don't follow trends, we set them, and we don't just lead teams, we shift legacies. If today's message challenged, stretched, or inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, tag it, lead through it, because real leaders don't just consume wisdom, they multiply it. Want to go deeper? Subscribe to the Ultra Influential newsletter for exclusive tools, behind-the-scenes strategy, and weekly mindset shifts for the leader ready to move nations, markets, and minds. Visit www.smpistrategies.com or send a note to leadership@smpistrategies.com. And if you're ready for next level coaching or consulting that positions you as the right leader at the right time in the right place, let's talk. This is what we do, and we do it with precision, power, and purpose. Remember, change isn't just something you lead, it's something you become. Stay bold, stay brilliant, stay a game changer.